Hi, this is Kelly Glick, and this is EDL 854 case study, the case of the missing booster funds. So let's get started. Just a little background on the case. We know that George Washington Middle School has a history of good parent volunteers and involvement of both PTA and Booster Club in funding different school activities. We know that both Booster Club parents and sometimes PTA parents not only volunteer, but they help to run concessions at sporting events, and they collect money and sell tickets. We also know that there's a background of Mrs. Bowman, who is the president of the Boosters Club, asking Mr. Stevens, the principal, to help fund her daughter's cheerleading trip, which is a really big deal for the young lady. She's quite an accomplished cheerleader, but it was over $700, and it would have benefited just one student, and so Mr. Stevens said no, because the Booster Club funds are supposed to benefit all students, or at least the majority of them. So at the last basketball game of the season, a parent had said that they had used a $50 bill and needed lots of change, and when Mr. Stevens counted the money at the end of the night, we know that there was not a $50 bill. There were also 11 tickets that were supposedly ruined and were not part of what was handed in at the end of the night. So here's what we know. It's normal operating procedure in this school for parents to manage the ticket sales and concessions and then turn the money in at the end of the night to the principal. We also know that there was a parent who, just in a side conversation with Mr. Stevens, admitted that he had just gotten paid and had to bring a $50 bill to pay to get into the game and needed change. And so we know that there was a $50 bill that was supposed to be in the proceeds at the end of the night. And at the end of the night, there were 11 tickets missing, with only a note that they had to be discarded because they were torn, but no, obviously the tickets weren't there, or the ripped tickets weren't part of what was handed in at the end of the night. And in addition, there was no $50 bill, and Mrs. Bowman was in charge of this. We know that previously Mrs. Bowman had requested money to help pay for her daughter's cheerleading trip, and I think those are the main points we need to focus on as we go forward. So what we don't know is what other parent volunteers would have to say that night. I think it'd be very interesting to kind of group some people up and just ask if anyone helped to count money at the end of the night, or who all was taking cash that night, if there were any interactions with Mrs. Bowman that were concerning. And we don't know if the money's truly missing. It's obviously highly suspicious, but it could be that a $50 bill was used to make change for something else. It sounds a little far-fetched, but it's just important before accusing anybody of anything to kind of consider all these aspects of the problem. Again, we don't know if the big question for me is, it seems like the PTA, the Booster Club, and the principal are all tied in together, and they're all kind of managing things together. And I know throughout this course we talked very much about that needing to be very separate. The accounting and volunteering procedures for Booster Clubs should be handled by Booster Clubs, and then school funds should be handled by the school. And this one seems very intermixed. So even though it talked about this being Booster Club missing funds, that's the title of the case scenario, the principal was in charge of overseeing this and depositing the money, so a little bit confusing to me on what role we're playing and who the money actually belongs to and who's in charge of overseeing that piece. We don't know if the district that the school is in has any policies or people that need to be contacted or got involved if theft is suspected. We don't know if there's any controls in place that the school's either following or not following related to admissions tickets and concessions. And so in my mind, the problem is insufficient controls. And I'll get into this a little later with the action plan as well, but also just kind of the confusing role between the Booster Club and the principal as well, and what their roles are. But insufficient controls, if multiple people had been counting money, if staff had been overseeing the counting of money, if in fact that's appropriate, given that this is Booster Club funds, there wouldn't have been room for this question to arise about whether there's missing funds or not. So here's my action plan. Given how I interpreted what we know and what we don't know, as a principal, of course, I would ask Mrs. Bowman individually if she saw the $50 bill and what happened to it. I think that does a couple things. I think number one, if there is theft involved, it gives her a chance to come forth and be honest about it and make it right. If she's not willing to do that, it gives the principal a way to let her know that he's watching and calculating this and that some changes are coming, so that cannot occur, that theft is not okay. Obviously, that these funds belong to the kids, not to her, no matter how upset she might be about the decision to not fund her daughter's cheerleading trip. And so then I think absolutely what has to happen next is there has to be some clarification about whose role counting and putting in place internal controls would be. Is this a fund that goes completely under booster clubs, or is this a fund that completely goes under school staff? And so that's a huge question in my mind. And so this agreement should be put into writing and follow all district policies when it comes to the separation of those two funds and the roles that people in charge of those funds play. And then if in fact the principal is in charge of placing new controls because of the agreement between the booster club and the school, then as a principal, I would absolutely require that if there's ever any damaged tickets, they still be turned in at the end of the night, that there is one staff person, and that could be me as a principal, or it could be somebody that I hire to cover games, but that it could be a teacher looking for extra, extra funds, but that they staff must somehow oversee at the end of the night both the counting of the money, the selling of the tickets, ensuring that tickets are sold in numbered order, ensuring that the money matches the amount of tickets sold, and that there's both training and for staff and for parents around that. I think as a principal, regardless of the role agreement that occurs about the booster club and the school funds, that there needs to be training instituted. So Mr. Stevens has this great pool of volunteers. They've also been doing this for a long time, and so it's time to develop an annual training anytime someone's going to volunteer, these are the procedures we follow, these are the controls we have, this is why we do it, and it ensures that all money we collect gets turned over to the purpose it's collected, which is student funds. So based on that action plan, okay. Well, apparently my presentation doesn't want to forward itself. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. So how does this action plan promote the success of all students? I think that we know from past classes that parent volunteers, especially in school, actually increase the likelihood of student success in the classroom and can improve academics even. So we want to keep the parent volunteer group engaged in the school. And so one of the ways of doing that is to be very clear about the PTA versus school roles, and then also training and procedures for these activities and events. I think that when you increase controls and, again, procedures and training, that means that all the money that's meant for student activities and supplies are actually going to that purpose, which of course benefits students, because the more activities and supplies they have that benefit them, the better they're going to do. And then I think asking Mrs. Bowman for her honesty and just having a conversation about what's happened kind of models that we want to establish a culture of ethics and integrity, and we have the same expectations for parents as we would have for kids. I think it's extremely important, whether it's one person at a time or with a whole group, that you really establish a culture where that is valued, where integrity and honesty is valued. All right, we have our slides working again. So what were my thoughts, feelings, and values while going through this? Well, I was highly suspicious. I mean, this just sounds very much like there's theft going on. Also recognizing that not all people who steal are also honest when you confront them, and so understanding I may not get all the answers, and then really needing to prevent this from happening again. It seems like there's procedures that could be put in place that could absolutely prevent the possibility of this kind of theft occurring. I was very confused about the role of the PTA versus the principal and how that was lined out. And whether or not parent volunteers were reporting to the principal or to the booster president. Obviously disappointment. You want to believe that anyone who's working for kids and with kids wants the best for them and wouldn't steal. And then kind of disbelief that somebody would turn around and get a no for an answer for something from a principal and then go behind their back and just take care of it themselves by taking money. Obviously value kids, the lessons we're giving the kids, and honesty with them. So unresolved issues. Kind of curious, if the PTA is in charge of PTA funds, shouldn't the PTA have voted on whether or not the cheerleading trip expense was appropriate, even though the principal should have had some weigh in? It seems like that may have been a more democratic way to do it. That would have maybe had Mrs. Bowman less focused on Mr. Stevens as the culprit of who denied her daughter the cheerleading trip expenses. Still about 95% sure that a theft occurred, but again, what if it didn't? What if there's something going on with this $50 bill that I don't know about? And then just curious about, again, how much parents have been trained, how trustworthy they are, how much supervision is actually happening, and if there's district policies that maybe this school just needs to realign with and start enforcing. So this slide, I realize my face is covered up for this one. I added this one just because when I looked at the PSEL standards, I could not find one that says Standard 8 was the one that we had in our case management directions. I kept finding it under Standard 9. And I looked at Kansas educational leadership standards, thinking maybe it was under there, and it wasn't. So I put this up here just for clarification. When I went through the case study, there were citations but not references that I could look at and research because I really wanted to read the entire standard and all the pieces under it before responding to this case scenario. So this is what I found. Just curious if this is what our directions were based off of. So let's get into it anyway. I definitely have enough information to just go through the different components that are listed in our case scenario directions. First of all, how does this action plan support effective and efficient management, show that there's effective and efficient management? I think by developing additional internal controls that leads to more effective management. I think requiring staff to kind of oversee this these procedures, if that's appropriate, once the roles are defined, I think that shows more effective management. I think training parents, when people get in a habit of just doing the same thing over and over, and they can kind of train new parents, that leads to efficiency and makes the whole process more effective. And then I think defining roles, again, is this PTA or school or booster responsibilities, that's surely going to lead to both more effective and efficient management. And so I just put a little quote in down here that I thought was kind of reflective of principals and what they have to deal with every day. Good management is the art of making problems so interesting and their solutions so constructive that everyone wants to get to work and deal with them. So component 2, how does this impact the social learning of every student? Well, certainly developing a culture of honesty and integrity. We want to model that. We want that to be the social learning that kids get out of the culture of their school. And so even if you can't directly share, hey, this is what is happening with adults right now, we think there's theft, I think just continually reiterating that this is what we're working towards. As we establish controls, as we work together, I think it's a good culture to improve the social learning of every student and to support that. And then I think setting expectations and training parents kind of models what we also want to do with kids. So I think kids are able to kind of play with social behavior when there's some clear boundaries in that. And so as we set up more controls for parents and more training in this whole thing, we're also modeling how we want parents and teachers to do that with students. We want clear guidelines, and within that we want people to thrive. And then I also think that money coming back from events like this really support competitive sports, other booster-funded activities, clubs, supplies, and obviously those are amazing contexts where social learning does occur, and it's how kids, again, play with that and learn new behaviors. And so I think making sure money gets to where it's supposed to is a way to also support the social learning of every student. So for component 3, the student academic learning, we want to make sure money benefits all students, that there's the money goes to where it's supposed to, and it's not just used for one student, so that improves academic learning and supplies for everyone. We want to make sure that parent involvement, we know that we want to keep our volunteers, we want to train them well, we want to keep them involved and have good relationships. We know that increases success in classrooms. And we also want to protect the principal's time. So we want to know that the principal's not going to just spend all his time chasing money down and doing things that will impact the classroom. So running out of time, here's my final thought, and thank you